todos, y incluyendo también a nuestras intérpretes, el equipo de producción, a todas las personas que están aquí, porque pues este es un proceso colectivo, que también lo haga.
Minute of silent reflection, personal reflection, and then I'm going to ask each of you to stand up if you're able to, if you're physically feeling comfortable being able to do that, and you're going to walk around and you're going to share your story with each of you, like at least 2 other people, especially 2 people that you have not talked to much during the colloquium. I'll give you a kind of signal that it's time to come back. I'm opening the door especially so you can go out in the fresh air and maybe walk around in the hallways also. Then we'll come back, and then we're going to open it up to, this whole session is really about sharing our vision for what does an anti-eugenic future look like. And so we're going to have Julia's videos, where she has been collecting voices from around the world over the last year, and we'll hear from them first. Then we're going to come back to the room and hear from all of you, starting with the students. I see some of the students from 17 here. I think our Yale students had to leave, unfortunately, but we'll start with students, and then we're going to go to the chairs of the different panels that we've had, and then we'll open it up to everybody. And then we'll have a closing session by Benjamin, Beatriz, Benedict, Miros, Nora, and myself, and then we go to then celebrate for the rest of the night. Sound good? Okay, perfecto. Entonces, so the question that I want you to spend 5 minutes reflecting on is, we've been here listening a lot with our brains, our ears, our minds, and it's a moment to pause, close your eyes. So if you're drinking something hot, maybe put it on the floor or hold it very carefully in your hands. And I want you to close your eyes. And we're going to take a deep breath, and we're going to come back into our bodies, right? Because our bodies are places of a lot of wisdom. And so take a deep breath. I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Inhalemos. And we can exhale collectively. So we're going to inhale on the count of 3, and we're going to exhale collectively, because el respirar, el conspirar is to be able to really conspire together, right? So we're going on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Inhale. Y exhalar. I want to hear all of you. Una vez más. Ahora mantengan sus ojos cerrados. Keep your eyes closed. If you're just arriving, you can sit down and keep your eyes, close your eyes. Feel your feet on the ground. Feel the history and the ancestors that helped to build El Colegio. The people that helped build this city, our indigenous ancestors from Mexico, from all of the Americas. Feel your legs. Feel the clothes on your skin. Feel the chair underneath your legs, on your back. Feel the air on your skin, on your face. Maybe feel if your shoulders or your neck are a little sore or tight, anywhere that you might feel any tightness in your body. Just feel and breathe into that. And let's thank our bodies for all of the wisdom that we hold, all of our ancestors, all of our spirits, our creators, the creative intelligence in each of us. Because we need all of that wisdom to be present in this room so that we can really think and envision and imagine a future without eugenics. So keeping your eyes closed, I'm going to be asking you to take a few minutes to reflect on the future. So in indigenous cultures, we think a lot about 7 generations and thinking forward into the generations in the future. I also want to bring in the wisdom of a peace activist in the United States, Elise Boulding, who talks about the 200-year present, that our time on Earth is framed by the oldest person that we know and the youngest person that we know. And so for a moment, think about who is the oldest person in your life that you have ever met, that you love. They are probably not with us anymore. Maybe it's your great-grandmother. Maybe it's a poet who you met, an artist, someone who inspired you. But who is the oldest person in your life? And for me, as an example, it's my tia Queta. I never met my grandparents. My tia Queta was the oldest person that I knew, and she was born in 1915. And I want you to think about what was the world of eugenics like at the time that that person, the oldest person that you know, what was the world like at that time? So take a moment, think about that person that you loved, that oldest person in your life. Think of them, see their face, and remember what the world was like at that time in the world of eugenics and how it affected their life and society at that time. Think about the progress that we've made since that year. So since my tia Queta was born in 1915 all the way to now in 2026, a lot of things have changed, a lot of things have not. We've actually lost a lot of ground in some areas. And now I'm asking you to think about the youngest person in your life. Who is the youngest person that you know? For me, it is my grandniece, la hija de mi sobrina, who is 1 year old. Actually, she's 14 months old. And now think about that person, think about their face, that child, and think about when they are 50 years old, 60 years old, 70 years old. Imagine what that world, that future will be like. What is the universe? What is the world? What do you want their life to be like when that youngest person that you know will be a full adult that belongs, that feels valued, that feels that their dignity is respected at all times, that feels free, right? That they have liberation, that they have creativity all around them, that they have a sustainable, thriving earth. Mother Earth is thriving at that time. So think about, what does an anti-eugenics future for them look like? Get really concrete. Think about what are they hearing in the world? Are they hearing birds? Are they hearing music? Are they hearing different languages? Think about, what does Earth feel like at that time without eugenics? How is the planet thriving without eugenics at that time? Imagine what does that youngest person in your life, how are they thriving without eugenics? What is different for them that you want to see in the world? So take a few more moments and get very concrete, because next I'm going to ask you to then open your eyes and get ready to share that with a couple of people. So on the count of 3, we're going to close the reflection, and I'm going to ask you to open your eyes. 1, 2, 3. Think about that person, that little child. For me, it's my great-grandniece, Faith, who is 14 months old. And I'm going to ask you, if you're able to stand up now, stand up. And we're going to start walking around for about 5-7 minutes. And you're going to share your vision. What did you see? What was that anti-eugenics future like for that child in your life? And you can go out to the hallways, or you can sit down and share with somebody, at least 2 people that you have not talked to very much during this, okay? Any questions? Okay. Oh, very good. All right, we are going to return to the room. Vamos a regresar. If everybody can come back and sit again. We're gonna, hopefully that was an interesting exercise and you got to share, you both got to think about this beautiful child that you love, the youngest person in your life, and also got a chance to share that with someone else. So come sit down, bienvenidas, sit down. If you haven't arrived, you're just arriving now. So while everybody comes back into the room and sits, maybe let me just take a couple of you, just some reflections about what was that exercise like for you? A couple of volunteers. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, Roy is here. Okay, Roy is going to take a mic. Perfect. We'll go to you next. Dale. No. What was does she want to share what the experience was like, just the exercise?
¿Con ella o en el coloquio en general?
No, con ella, en este momento, es la actividad que acabamos de hacer.
Ha sido enriquecedor. Es una persona a la que no conocía, que se acerca, nos presentamos y que rápidamente podemos conectar y hablar de un tema. No sé si es porque las dos hemos estado aquí durante el coloquio, pero esa es como una postura que ya tenemos, ¿no? Y que tal vez era una incógnita hasta ahora, que nos entendemos y que hay un nivel intelectual, emocional con el que podemos conectar y es muy bonito, muy enriquecedor.
Gracias. Prieta, you want to go next? Pietra.
I share with Grace. So we didn't exchange, was just with Grace because we have like a very close like conversation. It was amazing, and at the base of our conversation was how important it is sometimes for us to take out or to put our monuments of knowledge aside and go more on a personal level and think about like concrete, hard wounds that we accumulate, whatever the place you are in life or in society, thinking we have to put aside this, like, my conclusion is that we got like very, very personal. It was like very beautiful, and that it's more than the academic work that we have to do.
Thank you. Dean?
Does this work? Okay, cool. I shared with you and with Linda, and yeah, I came to the point of talking about how when I used to travel when I was younger to new places, I used to have to look up whether they were like racist or not. Or
Dean, can you speak up a little bit, please?
speak up more, yeah. Yeah, I used to have to look up, or I used to feel like I needed to look up whether they were racist or not, or, you know, I'd get some people say, oh, black people don't go there and this sort of thing. And from my experience of feeling in the world, that probably put up a lot of, a bit of protection, a bit of guardedness about being free in the world. And yeah, so for my nephew, I would love it if that wasn't there for him, if he could travel in his full self wherever he wanted his feet to go. And then we talked a bit about the future and imagination, and I sort of feel like that from my background in the media, or perhaps with academia, perhaps with law, like, it's very nostalgic. Something's happened and we need to figure it out, study it, or react against it. And what that does, from like maybe the conversation I had from my parents when I was younger, is that it sort of stunts your imagination sometimes. And I love the idea of like this Afrofuturism of being able to not have your psyche sort of controlled to the extent where you can just imagine anything, you know, you can, rather than kind of see it to be it, which from my younger days was like in sports or in arenas like this, to be able to go further, you know, to be able to go into the universe in your imagination would be pretty cool.
Sharing. Kath, and then we'll wrap up this part.
Yeah, we had it was difficult for us to figure out a way into this discussion, and it was just the two of us that spoke. We didn't have time to go to other people. But one of the things, I won't say everything, but one of the things that I had this yearning for, which is almost the flip side of your comment, is that my niece would live in a world where white supremacy wasn't always catching the throat of either herself or somebody else, and trying to figure out what that would look like. Because that's been a constant theme all the way through the last 4 days. So how would she be part of that up to the age of, say, 50, 60, 70? And how can I be part of that now? Would we be still having these conversations in 70 years? And is there some way that we can move beyond the, say, 400 or 500 year past? It's, in a way, it's like the opposite, but still same side of the moon as the comment that you made, Dean.
Great. Thank you, Kath. So just to close out this first part of the exercise, I want to acknowledge that may have been very uncomfortable, difficult, painful perhaps to even start going there, and we've just started to have those conversations. And I started there very intentionally because I think it's very important, especially for us as we are thinking about the future and thinking about a future without eugenics. We have to challenge ourselves to think much, much farther down the road, 50, 75, 100 years or longer. We are living in very challenging times, as we've been talking about these last days, right? Things are very likely to get a lot harder before they start improving. We may lose a lot more ground than we will before we start seeing the light and seeing the structural changes of the new societies that we envision. And it's going to require us to use all of our creativity. I truly believe that in addition to the wonderful, brilliant artists who have been with us here and sharing their artistic work, that actually every single one of us is a creative being. And we need to learn how to tap into that, and by connecting to our bodies and our spirits and ancestors and to future generations, right? To really imagine, to use all of our senses to imagine a future for the people that we love, and knowing that some of that change will not happen while we are here on Earth. We will then be the ancestors, right, to bring about that future. And so over the next 25 minutes, we're going to be seeing and hearing from voices from around the world through the video. So I think if we can, podemos poner el video ya. And these, again, thank you to Julia for interviewing people across the globe to share their stories about their vision for what does a future without eugenics look like. And let's listen to that, and then we'll open it up here again.
If you were to imagine an anti-eugenic future, what would it look like to you? And are there any reasons of being hopeful and achieving such a future?
And so I have less hope for the anti-eugenic future than I did, which is why having an anti-eugenic organisation or network is really important. Because I think we need to be calling this out, and we need to be doing this not just within academia, making sure that those voices go out and making, like saying, I mean, obviously as a historian I'm biased, but saying that look what happened here. It took 50 years of between Galton coming up with the concept of eugenics and the actual word eugenics for that to be applied in sterilisation in Nazi Germany. That's what everybody knows about, but it was happening before then. And, you know, we just don't want to be back there. Of course, we don't want to be back there. We don't want to be there in a future that has more technological capabilities to put that in place more discreetly and subtly. And, you know, without almost noticing that it's happened. So am I hopeful? I'm hopeful that organisations are coming together and noticing it and making parallels with the past, but I'm afraid I'm not as hopeful as I was.
Every day I lose less and less. Mostly because I can't see why people don't understand or see exactly why they're not seeing history repeating. And if they were to see that history would be repeating itself, there would be more of the five respect and relationships and responsibilities. People don't take responsibility for their actions.
Each other. In terms of hope, I mean, it's like really bleak, but I feel like in some ways the fact that we are in this kind of like compulsion at the moment and everything is so bad, I do feel like, I mean, as this sort of logic explodes, right? I feel like it's something, this is not, where we are right now is not sustainable, which is terrifying, but maybe, you know, sort of from the ashes, something else, you know? So I think that thinking about what we could build after this is hopeful, and there's an opportunity there, but it's like a very bleak hope.
I think of it as somewhat as a distribution of resources that is equitable. I don't know if there's any one political system like socialism, communism, democracy, capitalism. I don't think any of those are perfect or work well at all. I don't understand right now the intense greed that we see. I don't understand. Okay, you can have enough, maybe a little bit more to enjoy things, but beyond that, I don't understand. It's just about power. It's about leaving all these, you know, billions and billions to your grandchildren and so forth for your future. I think that's a big aspect of eugenics, right? For the future. Like there's always this, what's going to happen in the future? And so we need to continue to select, to pick the right traits or pick the right people. So I think that's a eugenics for practice, but I don't understand the immense greed by a very small handful of people. So I would want people to have enough people to the work that they do to be compensated adequately. Sometimes people say like, oh, they work hard, and so people who are lazy or poor, they don't work hard. They're the hardest working people, but they're not compensated for it. So I don't know why there's so much inequality. That to me is, again, I'm not advocating for people to have the same, no, but it's extreme right now. I think it's just extreme beyond that. And so I am hopeful. I think little by little, if we weren't hopeful, then why would we be here just hanging up? So we need to continue to fight. I think that's what keeps me going.
And I think the more we look at people who have, you know, from a position of extreme threat and marginalization, refuse to give in, refuse to be murdered, refuse to be destroyed, refuse to succumb to dehumanization and to fight back, that is where the anti-eugenics movement has its seeds. And from that seed, those of us who have privilege and power, we may feel more fearful than people who have much more to lose and who have already lost much more. But we can take courage from that, and we can stand shoulder to shoulder with them and encourage them and support them in their work by amplifying them, by writing more, by organizing together with them, and from learning lessons from their own organizing and from their own work that we can apply towards our work. And that is where I'm applying my energy now.
I mean, I think about, you know, the movement, the anti-colonial movement, for example. Any social justice movement, it's not, there is no arrival point. I think but that doesn't mean that we don't strive for that. And so I think it's hard. I always find it really hard to do that, to do a blue sky imagining of these things, because all I can think about is, I guess, the fight and the solidarity that's important to build for that fight, rather than thinking about some like an arrival point. But I mean, the arrival point, I guess, is or an anti-Eugenics future would be, yeah, solidarity and the everyone to understand that it's for one person's liberation takes everyone's liberation. So that's an important, I guess, goal is to be in solidarity with each other across all of the different ways. You know, eugenics is such a pervasive and complicated and intersectional thing, and so we need to come together to fight it at all its different.
When I imagine an anti-eugenic future, I do not see it as kind of just ideology. I think it's about what I call the infrastructure of justice. Justice is not ideology, as it needs infrastructure that makes it possible in daily life. So yeah, I cannot say like the what is hope, the reasons of hope, but the share and my organization and me, we have been working on so hard on like the creating that kind of the actual ground of justice in the process of reproductive justice movement in South Korea. And I think I have seen like the huge solidarity and coalition expand abortion politics beyond the punishment and beyond the narrow frame to, raise the broader issue of eugenics. So yeah, I have hopes.
We started a long journey to protect the human rights of persons with disabilities, who have been the main target of eugenics. And it was only 2006 that we finally achieved the CRPD after so many years, from 1948, when Universal Declaration of Human Rights was unanimously adopted by UN. So we are still our journey to protect the human rights of persons with disabilities, who have been the main target of the eugenics, is we have just begun, and we have a long way to go to achieve an anti-eugenic future.
I think an anti-eugenic future would be an anti-racist future, right? A future where we would actually be able to create a global society that understands that people in need to migrate to other places to succeed, that nativist sentiments really don't add much to sort of the discussion because culture is always changing anyway. And an anti-eugenics future would also be much more accepting of people with disabilities, people who are LGBT, because they wouldn't be seen as a threat to the nation or as a detriment to the nation, but rather as diversity, it would be perceived as something that always adds to the nation or to the global society that we live in, because diversity is actually, I think, a huge strength, right? Biologically, it's a strength, but it's a strength in all these ways to the survival of humanity, right? Diversity of thought, diversity of bodies and everything. I think the more diversity we have, the more likelihood we are to survive things like climate change and all these things. So I think that's sort of the future I would imagine, the future where we would actually we'd lose all that kind of hatred for people who are different from you. I think we're a long way from there, but I'm kind of like a pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will kind of person, and I'm very hopeful that eventually we'll get there.
An
It might
anti-eugenic future. I think an anti-eugenic future would be one in which there is an explicit understanding that humans are valuable, and that human contributions to art and culture and family are worthwhile in and of themselves, and in which there is therefore the great surplus, the great profit of modern society is applied towards the humane projects of helping people achieve their potential and their happiness, no matter what that may be, and recognizing that everybody has something to add. And I do think that an anti-eugenic future is one that unleashes the possibilities of humankind by making it so that you always have a home, you always have healthcare, you always have food, no matter who you are, and therefore you can work on the kinds of projects and contributions to humanity that are your particular contribution, that are your particular. Is there hope? The one thing I've learned as a historian is that you really can't predict what's going to happen next, right? In Russia in 1915, in Saint-Domingue in 1790, in all these places, nobody had the least idea. A lot of the great revolution, apartheid was brought down not by the highly organized ANC and United UDF in South Africa, but rather by, they were as surprised as everybody in the actions that brought about the end of apartheid. And I think we can't predict. So yeah, there's hope. But it's also something that has to be fought for.
I imagine an anti-eugenic future as one in which strong, present, and accountable states adopt clear policies to protect, promote, and value human diversity. In such a future, diversity, whether cognitive, physical, cultural, or social diversity, is not treated as a problem to be managed, but as a constitutive feature of social life that institutions are designed to support. These policies would not be marginal or symbolic, but embedded in education, in healthcare, in migration policies, and social welfare system. And equally important, this future will depend on societies that actively defend and sustain these policies as part of their shared ethical commitments. An anti-eugenic future is not achieved only through legislation, but through collective values that resist narratives of optimization, exclusion, and disposability. There are reasons for hope, I believe. There are social movements, critical scholarship, growing public awareness are already, all of these are already challenging eugenics assumptions and expanding the moral and political imagination around care, diversity, and justice.
What I think is most important and perhaps most compelling is to think about words and initiatives that are not against eugenics, but rather for something else. So I would like to see the development of vocabularies and cultural and social projects that would be for something rather than against eugenics, and to articulate more clearly what these values and the projects that arise from those values might look like. And one way that I contribute to this is to think about how to support cultural initiatives, how to develop narratives in literature, art, culture, that would highlight human diversity and human variation, preserve these varying forms of humanity that eugenics has historically persecuted and worked against.
Yeah, I not only can I imagine a future of anti-eugenics, but I see it in practice all the time. So in work we've done, collaborative work with residents in our medical school in fields like pediatrics and primary care and psychiatry, they're often, after they hear this history and they look at the archives, they're very, very alert to the subtle ways that those ideas continue to shape their field today. And they're also excited to talk about how they can approach and ways they have approached their own clinical practice that don't reproduce and reinforce those ideas. And so this has to do even with how a pediatrician interacts with their parents and guardians and children, how they talk to them about growth and development, how they try to use information to shape that understanding. So I see anti-eugenics in practice. I see with K-12 teachers who don't want to rely on standardized testing in the same way. So they figure out alternative ways to assess students' learning in their own classrooms. So there's many, many ways that anti-eugenics, not just a theory or an abstraction, it's a practice. And it's a practice everyone can do and reflect on in their own fields.
It's the awareness that race and other kinds of assumptions we make about people are not put into a scientific context. And this scientific context is important for us in the study of disease and in the study of the traits that we have and other really important scientific concepts that genetics can contribute to. But the pulling away from using things like race and sex, gender, away from that way of treating genetic data, it would be the perfect scientific world for me.
An anti-eugenic future for me would be quite easy to imagine because we'd see it happening, we'd see it operating. And in my context, it would be a university where disabled people were leading the organisation, where their views, their experiences and their vision for education was enacted and visible across the whole organisation. We wouldn't be having conversations about access to buildings because all of the buildings would be accessible. And we'd have a vibrant curriculum where our eugenic past would be explored in a productive way. It wouldn't be something that we were afraid of looking at and confronting and addressing. It would be something that we'd be happy to talk about. It would be something where people were developing creative responses. So not just learning about eugenics of the past, but actually building communities, collaborations, solidarities around action that we want to take now to address inequalities across London, across England, across the world. We'd see a true vision of global education. So rather than students just sitting in a room like the one that I'm in today, learning by themselves, they would be collaborating together to come up with solutions to the ongoing challenges that we will face as a society going forward.
I think my sort of vision for a sort of idealized version of the future that engages with these topics around eugenics is one where we've been at least partially successful in shifting the default position, if you like, in the population. And whatever level of education, whatever walk of life people are in, they're now more informed about the eugenic past, they're more informed about what might count as eugenics, things that might be more controversial than they take it for granted. Ideally, in my view, more empathetic, more inclusive, more understanding of people.
Yeah, I guess, and for me, that will look like it will be a lot less fearful and a lot more accepting of what we don't know, a lot more upfront about our own ignorance.
So in the interest of time, we're going to move forward so we can hear all the voices here. Julia, thank you again for all of the interviews. Everyone who shared their perspectives. Some of you are in the room, some of them were not able to travel to this convening. But let's start with the students first. So again, the question is, having listened to so many different panels and you asked questions, you made comments, what are your reflections on the colloquium as you think about the future of an anti-eugenics community and an anti-eugenics future? And you could also take it from the place of what is your vision for a future that is just more equitable and just and sustainable for all of us. So I'm going to ask students first, whoever would like to share. We have several mics, so there'll be plenty of room for people to be sharing. I see una mano por allá. We have one. If we can get a mic over there. Levanta la mano otra vez. Por aquí. And then otra por aquí. So we're going to have the students first, and then each of the chairs for the different panels, you know who you are. I'm going to be asking you to also do a reflection on the colloquium and the future about where do we go from here. And so I'll ask for volunteers, and then if not, then I will start calling on the chairs before I open it up to everybody else. So, empezando contigo.
Bueno, creo que ha sido emocionante todo este coloquio. Creo que es...
I think it's interesting because many of the things I'm concerned about have to do with biology, philosophy around biology. So I believe biology probably is the science where more ideological conflicts arise. Because when we understand biology, when we try to understand life itself, sometimes we want to make things simple and a vision that we objectify life. And especially in laboratories, this objectification of life is tough. And now, speaking about eugenics and all the conversations that we have had so far, we understand or we get a different sense of how these structures of biopower are present, this wanting to dominate life, and even to some extent, knowing that, I mean, I have epilepsy, and knowing that other epileptic people suffered eugenic processes, it seems like something that happened in the past, but at least for me, it was like a small aha moment that we were not perfect, and it has been quite enriching to listen to different perspectives that come from racialization, perspectives from disability. Seeing how the issue is addressed from different standpoints, and this helps us to think of a future. And it's not easy. It's not easy to think about the future, thinking about the future. And I think this is something that arises in the different panels. I don't like the word re-education because it's a concept that reminds me of totalitarian states. But I mean, going back to learning how to see and experience life in a different way, and understanding that life, I wouldn't even use the word perfection, but life itself has its own reason to be. Organisms adapt to the environment. I mean, I don't want to sound so Darwinian, but each organism has had to adapt itself to the different environments. And I think that tells us that even the racial element, I mean, skin color was a result of an adaptation of the bodies to given conditions. Black skin, white skin, yellow skin, or I mean, all of that in itself, it's in itself perfect on that sense, and also the connection between biopolitics and eugenics was peculiar for me. The person who was asking about the difference between these two concepts during that presentation, I think we can widen all the conversation around this topic. Anyone else? Any other student who would like to take the floor? Well, before giving my comment, I want to be brief because there's a lot of people here. I just started my PhD at 17 Institute, and I think I have been quite fortunate to come across with you, with what you are able to express around the topic, not because these are not the topics I usually work with, but it has been a really good surprise to see how these topics are being discussed. It has been quite stimulating for what comes for me on one side professional, but also academically, and as a reflection. Considering what you said, I am thinking about one of my child, he's 6, one of my children, my 6-year-old, and it's really hard for me to think about a future without eugenics. I think it's a very complicated possibility because what could we possibly do? What strategies, what small actions could possibly uh, take the power from eugenics? We have talked about, the big topics, so to speak, or topics that derive from eugenics itself. But what about daily life, where eugenics is present? We didn't talk about, for example, the eugenics of the cities, how cities are expelling people from downtown, from central areas. I live in a city that's called Guadalajara in Mexico. It's the second city, it's the second biggest city in the Mexican country. And we suffer with a real estate cartels where finding a house is becoming more and more impossible, and it's a sort of eugenics. It has nothing to do with race. It's something more. It's another way eugenics is present, where you are expelled from certain geographies because your economical position doesn't help you. So, eugenics produces a lot of ramifications that sometimes are not obvious. So, thinking about eugenics, as many of you, I am a professor too. And from there, I think it's also a place where we can understand, where we can open to active listening, where we can open to conversations. It was interesting today that cosmopolitics was also mentioned. Uh, I was happy to hear that as part of the conversation during the first session of today, that cosmopolitical view of the world. That's something we could start work. Environmental humanities, eccentric pedagogies. Pablo Martinez Zárate here in Mexico City works with that topic. Lovely pedagogy, tenderness pedagogies, or other imagination pedagogies. What they do is have a perspective more into subjectivity rather than just literacy, which is what happens in universities. And this sparks a lot of questions. How can we sustain this through established models, or models that seldom find a space for communication? But well, then again, this colloquium has been food for thought. the possibility to create or concoct new questions. So, well, thanks for all the people who came here to share with all of us. Hello, I am Ivis. I'm a deaf student. And well, I have to talk about accessibility. For example, the video you just shared. Accessibility, I think it's a matter of will. Having subtitles available on Spanish language for deaf people like myself. I speak sign language. I can read Spanish. I mean, I'm not criticizing in an evil way. I just wanted to share my reflections. I started my journey as a student in 17 Institute with the aim of doing a PhD. But as a deaf person, I have to say that I have never truly reflected about eugenics. So this clarity that I'm now gaining, for this clarity, I'm grateful. Now, how can I explain this to the deaf population in this country? What kind of language I'm going to use? Because here we're talking about concepts, scholarly concepts that are quite specific, quite deep. But how are we going to make this accessible to a community that usually never has access to this type of languages? Maybe in the future, I hope we can make these talks a little bit more generic, not not too scientific, like more open for the general public. I think that's missing. Muchísimas gracias a todos los estudiantes que han estado en toda la semana acá. Las preguntas, la calidad de las preguntas, también habla de la calidad del instituto y también yo sé que la gente de Yale tiene que irse temprano. So, well, thanks for letting us learn from you. Vamos a ir con los diferentes panelistas y pedirles a algunos voluntarios si quieren pasar.
Susan, thank you. Susan, and then who's next so we can give the next mic to you?
Who's going to be next? Okay.
Milton, maybe next? Sure.
Okay,
Susan right there.
you'll be
And
next.
then Pietra.
Great, thank you so much. I've learned so much throughout these sessions. It's been a lot to think through. In terms of the idea of what an anti-eugenic future would look like, and this is something that sort of, I guess I've been thinking about it throughout the days, but it kind of came to me a little bit more specifically now. I think in some ways the concept of the future and the insistence on the future and what we're going to do for the future and how the future will be better is already a eugenic concept. And this is something that has it's troubled me for a long time in my research. And so, I don't know, in some ways I want to say I'm interested in history, but I'm especially interested in the present moment. So this is not to say, maybe it's not realistic to say that we can get rid of the future, right? Like I have a 15-year-old son, of course I think about the future, but sometimes I catch myself thinking, okay, what do I want the future for my kid or all the other kids to be like? And I think it's a little bit of a eugenic trap. Like, what do we want for the future of our children, right? That has sort of a eugenic resonance to me. So maybe what I would argue for would be something more like a radical present, right? Or like some kind of radical proliferating variety and inclusivity in the present. And maybe it's a kind of present that is, I don't know, you can think of it in sort of a Zen meditative way, that we have to focus on the present because the present is all we have. But maybe there's also a way to think of it as just a present that is sort of more, I don't know, I'm thinking about like Walter Benjamin's thesis on the philosophy of history. Sorry to, go back into technical academic speak, but maybe a different approach to temporality where the present it's always the future that's coming, but it's really grounded in the now. So I think that thinking about time that way, for me, feels like a more effective way to not just counter eugenics, but also, as Rosemary Garland Thompson was saying, and that really resonated with me as well, like, what is it that we're for instead of always saying what we're against? And so I've been, trying to think of what types of terms one might come up with for that. Maybe it's something like radical inclusivity, but I'm sure others have, other sets of terms or ideas that we could use. But anyway, those are a few reflections that I have.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Milton. And then we're going to Pietra next, I believe.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that tension as well, right? It reminds me, sort of coming out of sort of Holocaust studies, I think the central message was don't be a Nazi, right? And it didn't allow us to understand how people got trapped by those ideas and how seductive those ideas and how ultimately wrong they are. Because I think that's the challenge, is that the ideas, they're just fundamentally wrong. And yet they're attractive because of the simplicity that they offer. And so I've been thinking about how do we get to a different level of understanding, moving from scarcity to abundance, right? Because fear is literally the enemy of imagination. When you're living in your amygdala, you're not in a creative space. You can't be. And so part of that is also how do we create community? How do we find our way back to each other? And that's a challenging thing in this dopamine-fueled economy, because that's where a lot of the fear is generated, by constantly being tethered to each other through electronic devices. And so maybe the question is really, how do we serve each other, right, in this work? How do we serve the work? On a practical and tangible level, I really appreciate what Dan was saying and some of the other people saying. There are examples of anti-eugenic work happening. And so how do we illuminate that? And then thinking about our work together over the course of this week, there's been a number of really amazing projects I've been excited to see. And then how do we create ways in which people can get access to those projects as a way of not only creating a sense of solidarity in the work, but sparking their imagination and sense of what's possible. I've been thinking a lot about, at some point I'd love to have exchange, what's been provocative and what feels actionable. Maybe we do that at some point before we wrap up, because I think those things give us opportunities for collaboration. I'm also thinking about developing, language that's more nutritious. What's a lexicon that pulls us back to an awareness of abundance? Even though the planet is in crisis, it's actually still, there's enough to go around, right? And so the pivot from scarcity to abundance is a critical piece of this. I don't know if it's an anti-eugenic project, whatever you want to call it, but moving out of that sort of scarcity model, and then seeing diversity again as an asset, as it is in nature, and we're part of nature rather than something to be managed. And so I've been playing a lot with language, but also trying to figure out, how do we hold each other, how do we support each other, how do we care for each other and care for ourselves in the work, right? And how do we question, some of the frames that may lure us back into places where we get pathologized. This is strange, but I hope it lands right, but it's sort of, as an educator, I remember when the trauma, I think I said this the other day on the panel, when the trauma narrative, I think I was doing some juvenile justice work, and somebody came in to present on the research on trauma, which is really important research. You're looking at context-based harms and how that gets embodied. And I was looking around the room, and all my colleagues are sort of quickly nodding their head and getting super excited. And I said to myself, I think I said out loud, I said, I hope this doesn't become the next narrative of pathology, because we were moving out of that culture poverty narrative into more of a sort of a genetic narrative of deficiency. And several years later in education, that's ruling the roost. All projects, money comes from prostrating ourselves and demonstrating ourselves as deficient or somehow traumatized. So I think we just have to be careful about how we get lured into these places that continue to want to label us. And then we need to find ways to be together. Something as simple, this is sort of more my own American sort of narcissism or preoccupation, but I'd love to see us get back to a national year of service where everybody we have to work together and solve problems together. I think that's where we discover our capacity. And I think the other thing is just a challenge is to think about a non-hierarchical system of relationships. Like we all come to it from our different sets of understandings or different sets of skills and insights. And I think it's the sum total of them that makes us powerful as a collective. And I think, how do we find ways to engage so that the ways hierarchies are imposed on us and we get invited into them don't get in the way of us being able to learn from each other. And some of the conversations are hard because they push us. That's just real. And sometimes they're tender because they touch us. But I think we have to find ways to care for each other, but also to be kind to ourselves and each other. Because the reality is this work is these are ongoing processes. And so intervening in them has to be seen as an ongoing process. And I think, at least I hope, that relieves us from the sense of urgency that sometimes drives us to get to an endpoint when this work is not an endpoint. And so part of the conversation we're having as we're wandering around is, how do we make sure that the histories we've all had to work so hard to excavate are abundant and available to people as a way of helping us understand why they're a danger to us? And I don't know that that's a harm-based narrative. I'm not sure what the narrative looks like, but the histories are important. And we've heard several people say that once they began to see it, they couldn't unsee it. And so how do we start that process? How do we start it early? But also, how do we find ways to do it that recognize that some of the ways that we've done it in the past are insufficient and may themselves be a trap? And that's not a knock on anybody. I mean, we inherit the sets of ideas we inherit, and as we interrogate them more, we ask different questions, and that should lead us to different places of understanding. So it is a process of knowledge formation, but I think it's best when it's a process of shared meaning making and shared knowledge formation, recognizing that the humility that the great ideas we came up with might be critiqued and maybe deemed to be unuseful at some point down the line, and that's actually fine. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Milton. We'll go to Pietra next, and then maybe Judy, if I can call on you next after Pietra.
Very difficult to speak after Milton. I'll try, but I will kind of try to collaborate with his thoughts because it was very uncomfortable, like be here with like a set of skills that we accumulated during like years of research and start thinking about this anti-eugenic future, something that we discussed like for at least 3 years with Benedict, you know, and we are like, oh, okay, let's go anti-eugenic future, like against eugenics. And then we said, well, there's like a lot of work that we have to do before to get there, if there is an anti-eugenic. And then I questioned, like what Susan said before, should we be for humanity? Should we be for like compassion? Should we be for like healing wounds and getting out of our like personal, individual spaces and realities and look into other people's eyes and other groups? Should we include? I mean, we have like so much work to do. But I think the fact that we are here, as Milton would discuss, and I discussed with Charlene, with like several colleagues and now friends here, because I hope this is like a beginning of a journey together, is that we have to kind of collaborate more. And I don't know, historians, they know, you know a lot, very well, that we are very like outer center. We love to work together in our like little desks and with our sources, but shouldn't we like start writing in several hands, like the science field they do, like they collaborate. So should we kind of start thinking about collaborating more, like thinking, creating concepts, questioning, like solid bases and foundations, and destroy them maybe, and build new ones. But I think it's this process will be a lot about collaboration, sharing and learning from each other, listening and learning from each other, and not forgetting to kind of bring people in. like not being afraid to bring more people in and be questioned by new people, and destroy and rebuild if necessary, because we're going to be for something better for the next generations, for humanity, for the planet. I think I'm going to leave with that.
Obrigado, Pietra. So we'll go to Judy next, and then Lucia, we can go to you after Judy. Gracias.
Thank you. I guess I learned a lot, but I learned about many perspectives, and I was raised to believe in 7 generations. Your words and your actions will be heard by those 7 generations back, and those yet born 7 generations forward. And so it makes me think, how can we braid all of these perspectives together to make something stronger? One blade of grass is not strong, but many blades of grass braided is much, much stronger. And I think I got a lot of tips how to be a better ancestor, to strive towards being a good ancestor.
Gracias. I'm going to speak in English now. I just perhaps wanted to add 2 things. One, thinking about the importance of reflecting on these topics from the perspective of joy, which I think we need, because we generally approach health from that bad side, and it's what we have a dialogue on, and I don't think we often move away from that. So where is the joy and pleasure? We know about what doesn't work, but we also know what might we connect with in our multiple realities and diversities. I feel, and this is my own criticism, I feel a complete disconnection between public health as means of communication, like graphic designers, communication designers, like that art is not just a tool, it should be in a form communicated through across transversally. Otherwise, we are going to continue in this very important communities and environments, but we're not going to move anywhere out of these spaces. Language is completely inaccessible. Academic language, I mean, I'm an academic and I do not like academic language. And it is really a matter of decision making to, in fact, determine if a screen is wide enough for everyone to see, if there are subtitles, if there are translators. Yes, all of that, 100%. If people can sense through other ways than seeing and hearing, all of that has to be embedded in absolutely everything that we engage with. And I know it seems almost impossible unless we're dealing or already working in spaces where we work across acknowledging our diversity and the importance of allowing language to be accessible. And I mean it in very diverse forms. That bringing it back to the idea of communication, I'm not going to say the arts, because I also think that comes with a lot of a stereotype. Communication, and how do we think about that? Because how are we communicating beyond words? And the language that is symbolic is the one that is more connected to people outside of this specialized knowledge environments. So I would love for us to think, and I'm thinking even about, how we have mapped and planned and suggested even the strategic convenings tomorrow. Public health is isolated from arts. And I would completely argue around that. For me, it's very much embedded. It needs to be transversal. Otherwise, I mean, it's like hiring someone to do someone's work, but at the same time, it's not communicated. So I think we've all addressed the fact that any work needs to happen. I don't know if we call it the interdisciplinary, intersectional, transversal, it has to be integrated. It is about collaboration. It is about hope, because I think we're all here for a greater reason. But it's also, I think it gives us and it challenges us to really, really think about possibilities that are alternatives to the ones that perhaps we're already very comfortable within. And we've seen so many amazing projects, and as someone said, like there's so much out there happening already, very much aligned to this. And of course we have the privilege to be together here now, right? But then how do we really work around, okay, we're here together. Why do we need to divide in groups? I mean, I know there's no criticism to the organization, but like just thinking, like, can we subvert that? Like, can we propose something different? Like, here, can we come up with a plan and like imagine an amazing impact-driven campaign for the community of, I don't know, Mexico City right now? Like, how far do we need to go for this? So can it be very concrete and then go little and then, I don't know, but I do think that the possibility of being together should also bring us an opportunity to really think out what does collaboration mean when at this level, which is brainstorming, we can also bring opportunities to think about how do we create a strategic communication around the impact that we can do. How does that work? We've shared experiences. Okay, now how could this be applied? And maybe we pick an example, I don't know. But yes, ways of communicating and really thinking of alternative forms, I think that's very necessary. And thinking about that from across generations, it's critical and important. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Gracias, Lucia. Is Aya in the room? I think I saw her before, but I don't see her, no? No. How about Cristina's not here either, right? Cristina Rosa? Oh, there you go, Charlene, okay.
So I warn you all, I reflect best with a little bit of time when things have been able to soak in and meld a little bit. But when you asked for the first reflection, the first thing that comes to my mind is gratitude. I mean, that you are all here, it's taken tremendous resources of all sorts, you know, money, time, labor, everything for people to get here, space, you know, and I just feel that it's such a privilege to be here, right? In this group of the many, many people around the world who want to work on anti-eugenics, that we are here and can talk with one another. So that's one thing. I guess when I think about, I think of this as one step, you know, one step for one group of people, and things that come out of this for me are, or I hope are the next steps, or in part of the next steps, are thinking about some of the language, but some of the ways we use and have tossed around words like justice, like community, like relationship, and that we really dig into that a little more as we go forward. I also hope that we are intentional about thinking about who's not here, you know, that should be here, and then thinking about the resources it takes and bringing them here with that. Talking about vision forward, yeah, that's a tough one for me, because part of what I think about is it doesn't matter in some senses what my vision is, right? It's the collective vision, and so that makes it really important that the collective is inclusive. And so I can write about justice, which I do a lot, right? But yeah, I'm learning. And the other thing I wonder about is how this movement relates to other liberatory movements that are going on, because there's huge overlap, you know, in people and effort, and what might mean how might we relate? And maybe that's a question for down the road, but it feels like starting those connections early on in this movement rather than later is probably a good thing. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlene. Open it up. Kath, would you like to share some thoughts? Anyone else in the back, maybe our friends from South Korea? Any other offerings about your reflections on the last few days? You can get started, Kath. Anybody else, raise your hand.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really tremendous being here. And as Benedict and a couple of you know, there should have been 2 other people from South Africa here. For various reasons, they couldn't come. So I'm very aware of the fact that there are lots of people that aren't in the room. But I wanted to not repeat what wonderful contributions have come forward, but raise something that emerged as a difficulty in one of our sessions, but I think is one of the most important things that we could think about going forward. And that is, I'll use a South African example to be concrete and not just use ivory tower language. During the period of Nelson Mandela's presidency, and then the next phase, which was Thabo Mbeki's presidency, the country made a huge effort to think about origins. And in the middle of Johannesburg, a huge origin center was created with the help of paleoanthropologists, archaeologists, linguists, historians, and human geneticists. And the argument of that center is that all human life originated on the African continent and is diverse in all its forms and beautiful across the world. And this was a scientific, historical, cultural, artistic, health, philosophical, legal project to assert, using similar material to the arguments made by the apartheid state and by eugenicists, but turn them on their head. So not to walk away from science, not to walk away from genetics, but to walk towards it with art, with human rights law, with ethics. And it really created a very interesting energy, not just in South Africa, but in the region. There are many trapdoors and pitfalls in that space. But I think that we lose a lot if we don't keep walking in that space. Clinicians, pediatricians, we heard from one in Julia's video, a person who wasn't with us, nurses, social workers, phlebotomists, pharmacists, people working with difficult circumstances of health crises. They have a huge amount to contribute to this. Pedagogically, they're struggling. They're struggling. We can see in that article from the New York Times today, one community of scientists are struggling against another. I think we really need to form these interdisciplinary solidarities, and we need to become scientifically literate, those of us that aren't, and we need to draw in scientists across all different paradigms as our sisters and brothers, and avoid false piety. That doesn't mean drop critical thinking. That doesn't mean avoid speaking. But it's one of the most challenging things that I think many of us can do. And that is also why I want to applaud Lucia's comment about engaging with this concept, which is ridden with problems of public health, so close to social hygiene, language, and everything we've heard about. But to walk away from that is to walk off the cliff. And just to, can I finish with this one interesting, I think, area that's opened up on the African continent, led partly by a group of scientists in Ghana, but also in Southern Africa, with colleagues all over the world, which is the African Genome Project, fraught with problems and with a long history leading into it that has diabolical devils inside of it, but which is very interestingly producing hundreds of papers a year showing that the genetic diversity on the African continent is 25 times the genetic diversity of the whole rest of the world, and that race is meaningless in that space, and that there are a whole range of other beautiful and complex patterns that emerge that are as various as the birds on the planet and the leaves on trees. And that kind of language and that scientific imagination, which is propelling African scientists, is quite liberatory and invites other people in. It is not despicable. It is not isolating. And I invite us all to maybe think about pointing our imaginations in that direction, not only repelling ourselves with nausea away from our fellow scientists.
Thank you, Kat. Any other comments? Anyone else who wants to share from South Korea? Thank you. I see our friend in the back. And then Benedict, we're going to go to you next, Miros, and then I'll invite Beatriz and Benjamin to close us out. Nora, sorry.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 며칠간 여기 회의에 있으면서 굉장히 특별한 시간이었고, 그런데 지금 이제 활동가로서 여기에 와 있다는 사실이 굉장히 낯설기도 하고, 그렇습니다.
Yes, it feels very special to be here, and I am a little bit kind of awkward or strange being here as an activist.
지금 서울에 있는 제 동료들은 감금된 누군가를 탈출시키는 전략 회의를 지난밤에 했고, 또 지난주 목요일에는 저의 소중한 농인 퀴어 활동가가 갑자기 세상을 떠나기도 했습니다. 오늘 그를 추모하는 시간을 좀 갖고 왔습니다.
Yeah, so my colleagues in Seoul, South Korea, is discussing about the strategy to let someone from institution escape that institution. And last Thursday, Bo-seok left this world. He was a deaf LGBTQ queer activist, and so we had today we had some time to mourn and remember him.
지난 며칠간 그래도 여기에 집중하려고 노력하면서 이제 반우생학의 미래를 그리는 것이 여기 계신 분들이 굉장히 거인들이고 그 역사 위에서 우리가 이야기를 하고 있다는 것을 알게 되었습니다.
So from participating in this conference, I kind of thought that to draw the future of the anti-eugenics is a very big step upon on the giants' shoulders, and yeah.
그리고 돌아가면 여기에서 만난 분들과 나눈 이야기들, 배운 것들을 가지고 어떻게 이제 사회 정의 운동에 적용하고 활용할 것인지 함께 이야기 나누고 노력할 것입니다.
And when I get back to South Korea, we will discuss about how what we have discussed here can advance social justice and how it can transform the society.
특히 원주민과 이주민의 경험이 저에게 많은 영감을 주었고, 이것이 제국주의나 식민주의에 맞서는 운동과 어떻게 연결되는지, 그리고 그것이 반우생학의 미래와 어떻게 연결되는지에 대해서 많이 생각했습니다.
And I've learned a lot about the Native American experience, and I realized how important it is for us to realize the struggle against the imperialism and colonialism, and how it can be crystallized into the concept of anti-eugenics.
네, 저도 영어 스페인어가 아닌 통역이 필요한 한 사람으로서 여기에 존재하고, 어쨌든 통역을 필요한 이제 사람으로서 여러 가지 어려움도 있었지만 다시 한번 통역자와 저를 초대해 주셔서 너무 감사드리고, 네, 내일 모레 이어지는 워크숍도 굉장히 기대하고 있습니다.
Yeah, so as a person who needs Spanish-English translation and again Spanish English to Korean translation, it was very honored to be here, and I'm looking forward to discussing more about and more on tomorrow and the next day's the strategic meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for being with us, and I'm sorry for the loss of the LGBTQ leader and that you were here mourning from far away. Thank you. Benedict, and then Mitos. I'm going to give you the mic. Mitos.
Yeah, I also want to express my condolences on your loss, but also, again, a huge thank you to our contingent from South Korea, to people coming from Australia, from Africa, from Peru, from America, from all over the world. And I think just the fact alone that we have come together for this gathering is already the start of something very important. There are a lot of people that obviously aren't in the room. We have been working on ways of making sure that their voices are coming in, particularly, I think, into the strategy sessions tomorrow and the next day. And obviously, this is just the beginning. This is a huge beginning. I think that this is, I mean, I don't want to make too big a thing of it, but I think it might have broken the mold on what might be possible. But it is still just the beginning, and there is such a long journey ahead. And I'm just so grateful that you're all at the start of this journey. I hope you stay with us throughout this journey. And I think this is and we need to ensure this is such an inclusive space for bringing more and more people into this. We are already a very inspiring collective, and I think if we are then able to inspire others to join us on this journey, I think the possibilities are endless. So just a huge gratitude, and yeah, I look forward to our building on everything that's been laid over the last 4 days in the next couple of days. So thank you, and a huge thank. Sorry, so I'm seeing you all tomorrow and the next day. So I'm not sure if this is the right moment to be doing this, but tomorrow and the next day we won't be having our wonderful interpreters, and I think we can all appreciate. We've been to a lot of bilingual, trilingual events. And so to Ilse and Brissel for your incredible work. People have just switched in and out of English and Spanish without any warning, and you have still managed to continue as if it is you that are carrying the conversation constantly with the same passion. I am ever so grateful. And Beatrice and Benjamin, we are so looking forward to engaging you in these discussions tomorrow and the next day, but a huge thank you for everything you've done in making this possible. So a round of applause for Benjamin and Beatrice. And the final thing, which is quite important, tomorrow we begin at 9 o'clock, and the museum isn't open tomorrow, so do make sure that you come. Marielena, oh, at the end. Okay, sorry, we're keeping going. Okay.
Okay, what am I supposed to? Oh, okay. I have been really struck by how people are coming from so many different backgrounds, but are finding a common consensus about what we want to see, where we think the dangers are, and also, and what I'd like to maybe in the next few days also really focus on are where are the strengths? What can we find that's unifying, that is inspiring, and that can allow us to move forward? We talk so much about the divisions with racism, with different peoples from different backgrounds and different disciplines. In fact, I find, now this is me as an anthropologist, that multiculturalism, that people coming from all sorts of different backgrounds, is an amazing thing. It's rich, it allows us to think beyond our own borders and our own premises, and there's nothing wrong with it, and it's something to be celebrated. So I think we need to be very careful when we're so busy saying, oh, we can't bring up these subjects, that what we're really saying is we can't bring up these subjects in a way that denigrates others, but that shouldn't limit us from saying what the strengths of our common humanity is. The most amazing thing to me as an anthropologist is how similar we all are. No matter where you go, everybody cares about their families, their communities, they're proud of their heritage, they're hoping for a better future for their children. That's what we should be focusing on as we move forward. So I guess emphasize the positive as well as call out the negative.
Oh, just very quickly, I've been very honored to be here among the greats. All of you have shared so much. I'm also frankly bewildered hearing from so many people, trying to listen and understand. And I say bewildered because it's a lot, and I'm trying to process for myself and how I move forward and how I contribute. I've missed a lot in terms of understanding because we're coming from such different spaces, but I love Nora's point about consensus and how we can work together. So, and the necessity of this work. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mitos. So I wanted to just share my comments before I turn it over to our wonderful host from El 17, to say a couple of my own reflections. As I shared at the beginning, I'm new to the eugenics world, and as I was driving, got picked up at the airport by Umberto, who was the driver, and I was telling him about what we were doing here. I found myself having a hard time explaining to him what eugenics is and what we would be doing over the next 5 days. And I share that from the perspective that I believe that part of our job going forward really does need to be to find ways to make our work and our vision and the history more accessible, and to find not just language, but images and different ways of communicating at a larger scale because of what we are up against in this world and this planet. And I also think that it's important that we lead from the inside out. And what I mean by that is really starting from a place of self-love, right? There is so much of the harms that we have experienced throughout our lifetimes and our ancestors, that we carry so much of that pain, and the need to really love ourselves and do the healing that we need to do with ourselves as well as with the people closest to us, and speaking about what our vision is for a world that is more just and equitable, whether we use the eugenics term or not, and having the courageous conversations, the listening, the active listening that has come up a lot throughout this period. I believe firmly that humanity desperately needs us to learn how to listen to each other, not with our ears, and not only listening to the words, but listening to our hearts, listening to what is not being said, listening to the energy, right? Feeling each other's humanity and seeing each other's humanity. And I think that in that community of practice, as we are doing that in our own individual lives with the people closest to in our communities, we'll be able to build stronger bonds and strengthen this community that we are already building, right? This is, I think, that radical presence. It's what we are doing here, expanding it and taking it to scale at a larger level. I believe that is what is needed in this moment. And I just want to say thank you, gracias, obrigado, merci, to every single one of you who has said yes, que dijeron sí, llegaron hasta aquí. Estamos todos en la Ciudad de México. You've all said yes to being here in Mexico City for this place of coming together, tapping back, learning from history, unlearning, and then really building together, weaving together a future that is worthy of future generations as well. So gracias. And I turn it over to Beatriz and Benedict, Benjamin.
Bueno, primero quisiera agradecerles por estar hasta este momento, porque han sido, bueno, nosotros llevamos en coloquio desde
have been having this colloquium since Monday, and the organizing team has been doing the colloquium, or, well, actually has been organizing everything for a few months. So we are not in the final stage. We still have tomorrow and Monday, and also the book fair that we would really like to invite you to go to, although maybe you have seen it already. So I think that maybe I would just add a couple of things more that come from our perspective from 17 Institute. So for 17 Institute, it has been a very interesting experience to share. We actually told you at the beginning we had never had a curator invited for the colloquium. The colloquium, usually this type of forums tend to be spaces that are opened every 6 months so that our students can be here, can come and share their experience, because our programs are postgraduate and all of them are online. And of course, every 6 months, they're here. They come from all over Mexico, from other countries as well. We have had colleagues that came from Uruguay, Colombia, Ecuador. And so this was a space of encounter that was new because always we are the ones creating the colloquium. And almost always the interventions are from colleagues that are around the world and that they are working with critic thought, but also aligned to any line of work that is linked to the Institute. And it has to do with topics that go out of the margins that the university is used to dealing with. And I really would like to thank Marielena because today she told me something so beautiful and for us is very special. This is a small institute, as Benjamin mentioned. It has been existing for 25 years and it's been trying to survive because we don't depend on the state. We do not depend on organizations. And you probably can understand that that makes it complicated, but it provides independence. So being able to have an eugenics colloquium has been done with all liberty because we don't have any imposition from the government saying you cannot spend the money on this or you cannot do the other. And today, hearing Marielena say that the students from 17 Institute, they show the level of commitment and thought due to the type of questions they ask, that was very well, we have the green light, let's say, to think that we are on the path of, oh, okay, we are doing something well. Mostly thinking that yesterday, Rosemary Lauren said something very interesting that applies not only to art projects. Money is always in the north. And for us, it has been an essential task that we have set as a goal to find collaboration from south to south, from south to north, from north to south. That is to say, we're trying to establish the most possible connections or the higher number of possible connections because we have tried to get out of the box of thinking where a lot of the academia is, where Western and all of the tragedies of Western are caused by European thinking. Well, we want to establish and build bridges. We know about the history and all of the effects that that has had in Latin America, talking about the conquest, etc. But just as Marielena was mentioning, we want to start healing. And the only way for us to heal is to establish and build this communication bridges, these encounters. And that is why for us, it has been so incredibly special to have you here. I spent a very long time working in Europe and my experience was not the best. It's not necessarily that it was towards me specifically, but it was towards people that we were working on some projects in Asia where there was always this idea of imposing from Europe the ways to do things, the ways to think about things. And now being in Latin America, in Mexico, that is not my country either, and then find that we have people here from all over the world. For me, that has been incredibly special because it allows for me to see what is, well, that it is possible to establish ways of communicating with each other, even if we don't necessarily agree. One of the goals of 17 Institute is that even if we don't have consensus, or we don't reach consensus, we can still respect our differences and work from there, right? We have had some very strong colloquiums, and we had one where we were talking about the Israel and Palestine with very antagonic and diverse stances. However, we did manage to sit people down and establish encounter points, even though it seemed that that wouldn't be possible. So the only thing that I would like to say is for you to see here at 17 Institute a space for encounter and for disagreement as well. But if in that space of disagreement, for you to think that there will always, we will always have the doors open to dialogue. We are living in such hard times. I experienced this, for example, here in Mexico, seeing from here part of the stalking or even harassment from the neighbor in my own country in Ecuador. I just came back from there and I see hundreds of Ecuadorians that are going back after having created a life in the United States, and they come back with nothing. And I wonder, well, what can we do, right? And there, I think that even if we do need to work in collectivity, I do think that the individual work has a lot to do, or it is very relevant as well. I'm always thinking about my work as a teacher and as a colleague here at 17 Institute. I mean, our attitude towards daily life, how that can also determine for us to establish community life. And well, I would just like to really welcome you to a new stage, because of course now this colloquium is over and now the network meeting starts. But in this new stage, knowing each other, and 17 Institute knows a little bit more about the network and vice versa. This is a new stage of relationships. And I would just like to tell you that your experience as well as ours are both necessary and important. So starting from there, I think we are going to be able to establish links from person to person, but also from organization to organization, from institute to the network, etc. So I wanted to say that, and I really wish that you also enjoy Mexico City. You can enjoy the food, the sweet bread, and just to let you know and tell you that the coming part, the next part of the colloquium is also very meaningful for 17. The honorary awards, there is always a recognition of people that one way or another they are having this dialogue with 17, and they have been doing it even if they don't necessarily know it. So really, thank you so much for having been here, for the collaboration. And also, first of all, I really want to thank the entire team. I want to thank Roy. I want to thank Pau. Also, I want to thank Guillermo, all of the technical team as well from San Ildefonso, also the people from the directions and the directive, also our sign language interpreters as well. And I also want to take the opportunity to say this because this morning we found out about a very sad news, and these are the types of news that also allow for us to think how we're going to keep working. Right today in the news in Michoacan, 2 sign language interpreters were killed. They were friends and colleagues of our colleagues here. They murdered a couple and their 12-year-old daughter. And when I hear that something like that happens, not just in Mexico, but also in Ecuador, in Colombia, etc., I wonder how these spaces can give hope back, that it is possible at some point first to be able to understand justice in a different way and actually have it. And on the other hand, think that these types of encounters give us the idea that there are compassionate people in this world that are going to be generating compassionate spaces as well, and healing spaces, just as Marielena was mentioning. So I also want to take this opportunity to express Iris and our interpreter colleagues, our accompaniment, and also our rage because of the situation. And I think also hugs from the group is very important. I want to let you know that Iris is our first deaf student at the Institute. She is a PhD student, and it's unbelievable everything that she is contributing with. Tomorrow, we are going to have a presentation of a book about deafness that we carried out, and we are going to have Nora for a few minutes. So you are also, if you're there, you're also going to be able to spend some time with the deaf community, and I'm pretty sure that tomorrow they will also be processing today's news. So I would really want to thank you for the closeness that you also can have with our colleagues today. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Beatriz.
Put together a lot and very clearly. I want to add my voice to the thank yous, all the ones that have already been expressed, and also to the curatorial work that both Benedict and Beatriz did over the preparation months before this colloquium. I was somewhat involved myself as well. But it's a very complex thing to put together. And there's nothing evident about two organizational creatures that begin to speak to each other. So I want to ask you for a big round of applause for their work. So I really think, Beatriz, you covered the grounds. So I will just try to be brief and introduce something of an afterwards. As you can imagine, I've been involved in thinking about building infrastructure for all these years, 25 plus. I think of the Institute as a platform that allows for a series of possibilities. And of course, the challenge has been to build infrastructure independently and to build infrastructure that is critically oriented. And of course, there's loads of things to learn along the way, every day, in the present and into the future. So I have really appreciated the mirror that all of you who have traveled from afar have afforded us, locals. I have been impressed by the wealth, the complexity, the perspective, and also simply the quality of your feelings in relation to the contemporary circumstances that we're facing, that have already been mentioned. And I wanted to underline the absolute importance of what we've been doing in the last few days. And to put that into perspective, I mean, these 25 years of the Institute and the possibility of establishing an alliance, which is really improbable, as a matter of fact. I mean, there's nothing common or straightforward about it with an entity such as the Colegio de San Ildefonso. The possibility that we've had to launch a book fair during these very days. We've had an amazing reception by the press in these few days. You're probably not aware of that because, of course, this is not your local press. But we've been covered right across the political spectrum, which is always my objective, that we build bridges in the way that Beatriz was saying, instead of, you know, remaining in our own echo chambers, and so on. And the possibility of having established this activity as the very first in the Futures workshop, all those quite voluminous developments really derive from having met throughout these 25 years and sat through 40 colloquia such as this. So what I want to underline is simply the power of conversation, the power of sharing ideas and confronting them and debating them, and of course doing it again and again and again, so that it really has a sort of a geological insistence about it. And I'm mentioning this also in relation to the work which is coming up, which you've been embarked on already for quite a long time. I mean, the network. But there's nothing like simply doing again and again and again this kind of thing. And this is perhaps something that we can share as an experience with the upcoming Global Anti-Eugenics Center. I really cannot exaggerate the importance of that. If we multiply the days we've spent doing that by 25 years, that's like spending 8 hours a day just gabbling away for 240 days non-stop, with multiple generations coming in and out. And then you get these amazing returns of people who took part in an earlier conversation, then come back with new sort of discoveries that they bring with them. So I just want to end by celebrating our days of conversation, again, celebrating and thanking the presence of each of you and all your contributions, including your silences, simply on the basis of the amazing strength that can bring to a project and its capacity to multiply initiatives and possibilities along the way. So congratulations and let it come. Thank you.
Sí, anuncios para mañana. Benedict, any announcements for tomorrow morning? I know we need to be here at 9 a.m. Strict 9 a.m. entrance for tomorrow because the colegio is closed. So they have staff to open up for us at 9 a.m. ¿Qué más?
¿No? Bueno, sí. Solo invitarles a, o sea, nos tomamos
Inviting you, we are going to take 15 minutes, and at 6 we come back with our honoris causa ceremony, and let's take some coffee.